Welcome every
Sorry.
Welcome everyone. We're being recorded. It's a Canadian Strength Conditioning Association webinar, and I'm Dr. Trevor Cottrell at Sheridan College, joined by an extra special guest, Joe McCullum. Hello, Joe.
Thanks, Trevor.
So for those who don't know Joe, he's got a great little bio piece on the CSCA website. He's one of the first ones we interviewed because he really has a nice background, a good lineage, as we often say in our industry. Joe was a meathead football player back in the day, did a little bit of wrestling too, ended up at University of Utah and playing football there. And then he stuck around to learn how to be a strength coach and became a decent strength coach, from what I hear, under Joe Ken and a few others down there. Got tired of the University of Utah and all that skiing he did down there, and he decided to come back to greener pastures up in British Columbia. So he's now, well, he came back, he was in private, right? You're in private for about 10 years or 5 years?
12 years, yeah. With
12 years, 10. Yeah, at level 10.
Yeah.
And built that program up, had a nice internship program there, and then got converted over to UBC when they finally decided to hire a good strength coach. And he's been there for about 6 years now. So for those of you who don't know about Joe, he's a guy worth meeting and talking to because he's got some legit experience and legitimate viewpoints. But what we're talking to you about today is using combatives as a contact preparation training tool. So combatives, we're talking wrestling, judo type movements, and you could also add in gymnastics/tumbling type movements, including that into a strength conditioning program in order to prepare athletes better for mostly contact sports, but even what you may term non-contact sports. Basically, a lot of sports involve a lot of different movements, and sometimes those movements involve running into individuals or falling down and getting back up. And so whenever you're dealing with combatives, it's teaching you the physical literacy, let's call it that, to be able to get into these positions and out of these positions effectively, efficiently, without getting injured, and quickly, so that you can hopefully overpower and win against an opponent. So this is fairly novel in our industry. We spend a lot of time talking about reps and sets, and we spend a lot of time talking about sprinting and cutting, but we don't spend a lot of time about rolling around and tumbling and pushing people back and forth. It's a little bit out of the average strength conditioning coach's purview. But part of that is that a lot of strength coaches don't have a wrestling background, especially in Canada. There's not a lot of wrestling in Canada, quite frankly. And so it's not a comfort thing. Some people are worried about any kind of physical contact. Of course, we're coming out of COVID, so no kidding on that. Hopefully we'll be able to get back to some contact shortly. And but this kind of thing has to be considered because many sports, especially now with COVID, have been out of contact for a long period of time. And if you've ever not fallen on the ground for a while and then you fall on the ground for the first time, it kind of hurts more than after the 10th or 20th time falling on the ground. So anytime you have impact, it's stress. It's like an eccentric load, right? It's a stress on the body, and your body adapts to that, and it learns how to bounce better. And so combatives will help condition that bounce a little bit and prepare you for some of those impact workouts that you may be going for. And then I guess the bottom line is you're teaching, as I said, physical literacy. You're teaching people how to balance, how to move, how to get in uncommon positions and out of those uncommon positions. And that's going to transfer into a lot of different areas in a lot of different sports. So Joe has a series of slides. He's going to take us through a little slideshow, and then he's going to take us through a whole bunch of videos. All these things are available to you, the listener. There's going to be a link provided in the little information tab. If you read the information tab, you'll see the link of all the videos so you can have access to them. And then, of course, contact Joe. Hopefully we'll get him down for a workshop in our area at some time. I'm in Ontario. And you'll be able to learn more from him. So Joe, it's your show. Bring up your slides and let's get it going.
Awesome. Thanks, Trevor. Okay. So I'm just, before we start here, one thing I just want to preface is that all of these videos are probably 5+ years old. None of them have been done during COVID. So just to be clear, that we weren't trying to be sneaky about anything. As Trevor mentioned, I've been doing this a while. I grew up wrestling, rugby, and football, and coaching those sports when I'd come back from the States. And then when I first came back to Canada, I coached all those sports. And I basically formulated my idea around this as soon as I got back from my playing career. So for me, this is important because what I realized is a lot of the coaching that I was receiving as an athlete had parallels to both rugby and wrestling, and I started layering them into my actual coaching of football when I was working with our linemen, say at the high school level, and then I started using with more of my athletes as I was at level 10, as I saw them, because I could see the carryover to it and the importance of it. It's not for everyone, that's for sure. And I just want to make sure, as Trevor mentioned, my email is right here. There are also videos on our UBC performance site, so please feel free to check those out and feel free to contact me. I'm usually pretty good at getting back via email, so just also know that I have 650 athletes, 25 teams to deal with, so I want to make sure that, you know, if it takes me a couple of days to get back to you, there's a reason for it. So we'll get started. So I want to start with some of the influences. So the first one is just my grandfather, because he was a professional wrestler, so like WWF, but he was also a judoka, pro lacrosse player, played for the national team, just an old school tough guy kind of thing. And he used to always beat us up when we were kids, not like in a negative way, but we'd try to wrestle with him and he would grab your pinky and you'd be on your knees. So he was kind of an influence for me on that and always supportive of this. Bruce Lee is one of my favorites. If you haven't read his books, you'll realize that everything that we're hearing about now is probably developed and refined by Bruce Lee, who stole it from someone else probably 300 years before him and made it his own. And there's some really great stuff on movement there. I would recommend that. And then the other is Rick Majerus, who is our basketball coach when I was at Utah. So this is my buddy Rob, who is doing a boxing session. You can see Mike Doliak in the background. He had a long NBA career as well, and he was an unreal athlete. And at the time, he was as hard as they come, like strong, fit, one of the best athletes I've ever seen in my life. And Rick had felt that the guys weren't tough enough. And at the time, we had these foam rollers before people kind of used foam rollers. And I don't think we knew what we were doing. It's just everybody buys whatever everybody else is buying. And so we started using those to like block the guys out and hit the guys. And he's like, what about boxing? So we called in Rick, Rob, who had done some hand fighting and jujitsu with some of our former athletes who were now in the NFL. And Rick had seen that and thought that looked cool. And he also done some boxing stuff. So we got the guys out, and again, not a huge correlation necessarily to getting punched in the head and playing basketball, but like the change of elevation component and the upper body and the disassociation piece was really impactful. Obviously, things went a little bit sideways at times because they're competitive guys. So we had to nix it pretty quick, but it was a great learning experience on our end. And then there's just a picture of Fat Kid Joe wrestling in high school, just to show that I did wrestle. And I wish I knew what I knew now then. So
is that your bum or your face, Joe? Is that, I can't remember.
My face, yeah. I wouldn't.
Okay, just making sure. Good, you got a headshot at least.
Yeah.
That's good.
So just before we start, this is kind of the stages of what I went through, and I've mentioned this a lot. I do a lot of work with my undergraduate and graduate assistants, and I've always had a big student learning program wherever I've been, and it's quite hard with this information age for people to not get sensory overload on things. And I've always kind of said this, and I'm sure we've heard it from other people before, but before you worry about thinking outside the box, you should know what's in it first. So like basically learning how to do the basics and do them very well and then work your way through it. And like, this is my kind of curmudgeon stages that I went through. And I think we can all agree that strength and conditioning really moved through the necessity to see that we need bigger, faster, stronger athletes, right? And so we drew from what we knew were the biggest, fastest, strongest athletes, which is your bodybuilders, powerlifter, weightlifters, and your fastest were your track and field. And, you know, everybody had their mentor and their guy that they went through, and science was starting to kind of peek through around it, but it was still pretty low level. And the big piece was that the military or the militaristic style of coaching and the theory behind it is really heavy. Like everybody falls in line, everybody does this, everybody wears the same thing. And as I move into the contrarian phase of my coaching, I realized that we need to have better athletes, not better weightlifters or just better sprinters or just huge athletes. We need people who can have some level of creativity. So he started drawing from other sports, and martial arts and combat sports was a big part. Sport coaches is a huge portion, like learning how to coach from people who actually coach. Your therapists and your gymnasts and like. And then as you get older, you get more miserable for whatever reason, and you start realizing, hey, maybe there's more to this, and you start looking outside of the tradition of strength and conditioning and just sport, and you look at your business leaders, your service industry, your psychology, and just basic pedagogy. So these are kind of the stages I've gone through, and I'm not saying this is for everybody, but it's what I've learned through, and a lot of it is just trial and error on my own part. So I just like to preface with that. The next part is just going through KPIs or sport attributes, and I think what we really need to talk about right now is, given the fact that we're in a pandemic, we're hearing a lot about the importance of your rudiment plyos, your sprinting, and all of these things. And it would be insane to disagree with that, in my opinion, especially if you look at this last weekend. I think there were 7 ACLs in the NFL alone, and NRL has had crazy injuries as well. So I think what we need to realize is that, yes, you need to sprint, yes, you need to condition, yes, you need to jump and land, but we also need to look at the other attributes that are going to keep our athletes safe and prep them for what they're going to be doing. So one thing that we can't ignore is that if we are going to go into contact and we know that our athletes are competitive and they're not prepped for it, we are putting them at risk. So I would take it and say it's almost as important as to ensure that with your sprinting and your plyos that you are adding some contact for the upper body. The head, neck, shoulders, wrist, elbows all need some level of tempering before they get into it. So these are kind of the key ones that we go through, and I'm going to touch on a few, and I'm going to ask the viewers when they look at this to take a look at the highlighted videos so they can get a better idea of what we're talking about. So obviously landing and jumping, stopping and starting. The big piece here for me, the read and react visual versus the read react tactile, is when we talk about perception action coupling, we rarely talk about the touch piece. It's usually you're actually reading a defender and then you're making a movement from there, or vice versa. And I think we need to talk a little bit more when it comes to athleticism where there's any level of contact. So I don't just mean a guy trying to stop a goal line stand as a defensive lineman. I'm talking about like a soccer player getting bumped in the air, and how do they respond to that? I'm talking about a basketball player posting up, and it may not be a huge amount of contact, but it is still contact. We're going to talk a lot about the ability to fall and get up. I've got some videos that we'll go through. The ability to hold tension and manipulate tension, meaning I'll show a couple of videos as well here. And the idea is that there's times where we need to be rock solid and strong on our feet. There's also times where we need to take advantage of someone putting themselves in a poor position. So example would be like an offensive lineman makes contact with a defensive lineman, and as soon as you feel that shoulder turn, you're going to take advantage of that and finish them into the dirt if you can. So we don't coach that necessarily, but you learn that through some of the contact drills that we're doing and some of the wrestling concepts that we're doing. It's important to also understand as you guys go through this, but don't think we're trying to coach wrestlers here. We're not trying to make better wrestlers here. So there is a gray area there. We're trying to give them principles of wrestling that may carry over. Obviously, we need to learn how to make contact and yield contact. So again, yielding is a big portion of a lot of the training that we do. So learning either how to absorb and learning how to maintain your ground or stand your ground. Fending and evading, change of elevation, change of direction. Being strong on your feet is huge in any kind of sport where you need to carry a ball or a stick. I'll talk a bit about transitions, meaning what do you do once you've fallen? The video that's on here for the fall and get up it's an old video. It's probably shot on a flip phone, but after I looked at that, I realized there's hundreds of volleyball videos where you can watch like a series, and there's people flying all over the place on the ground. And the transition piece to me is a huge KPI for a sport coach as well. So if I if I dive onto the ground, I need to re-evolve myself into the play, especially in a sport like volleyball where it's split second. You need to also get off the ground because your partner could be jumping right next to you and we're at a high risk of rolling an ankle or blowing a knee out or whatever it is. So transition piece could also mean when you fend or evade a tackle, there is contact there. What are you doing from there? How's your upper body helping with your lower body? Scrambling is more a wrestling term that I would say is really, for most sports, I'm going to probably draw that more closely to say rugby and rugby league when we're on the deck. That would be a big piece of it. Again, you know, your quarterback does scramble and it is a skill set, but it's just evasion basically. So when I'm talking scrambling, I'm talking more from on the ground, and I have videos that are in the links that you'll see a little better about that. I put quick feet in quotations because every single coach will tell you that their athletes' feet are not big enough, especially your bigs in basketball and your linemen in football. And again, all of these attributes here are things that I think we could tap through what we're doing with our wrestling protocols and our wrestling procedures that we use. Misdirections, a big piece of the wrestling as well that I think carries over heavily into sport. And then obviously patience, creativity, and teamwork. And you can't be a wrestler and be completely aggro the entire time. A lot of what wrestling has to do and your general martial arts is using someone else's energy against them. So if you're always very rigid, you're at a high risk of getting points scored on you. A couple caveats because this is so foreign to athletes, especially in the weight room setting. Most athletes hate touching each other, even though like they'll beat the heck out of each other in practice the night before. They'll do 20 set pieces in the scrum, or they'll, you know, do full on O-line versus D-line one-on-ones or 9-on-7 type drills. But then when you get them in the wrestling or in the weight room and you ask them to put their hand on a guy's shoulder, it's like completely foreign to them. So you have to get over the fact that it's going to be weird for some athletes to touch. And then once they get comfortable with it, you need to be careful because they are competitive and things can go sideways quickly. So you have to have space for sure for a lot of the drills that we're going to talk about. Trevor, we talked about like the LTAD and like tumbling, for example. And the reality is most kids have not done any form of tumbling since they were in preschool and elementary school. And it really shows. But again, it's like riding a bike, right? As soon as you start to do it, it's literally within 1 or 2 sessions, we see massive improvements. If your athletes can't absorb a fall, so like they don't tumble well, I would definitely probably not teach any takedowns or throws. I don't personally teach many throws, if any, but I do put them in a position that is similar to certain throws, more for them to learn how to absorb the landing. So it would be, if anything, I'm not trying to teach them a throw. I'm trying to teach them a more dynamic way of falling, and there's a bit of force behind it, so it's a little sped up. Their wrestling knowledge comes from watching WWE, and their understanding of wrestling is that they're good fighters in the UFC for the most part. So it's not a bad idea to kind of preface your sessions of what your goals are before you do it, because again, it is very foreign, and wrestling unfortunately isn't something that like Olympic wrestling isn't something that people are going to watch at the highest level on TV or on the internet unless you love wrestling. So that's the unfortunate piece about it. I've chipped so many teeth, especially with like newbies. So what we realize is this is foreign, and we're going to put you in a weird position, and the fight or flight comes in pretty quickly. So just being cautious that when you put someone in an uncomfortable position or you're pulling them or pushing them in a weird way, they're probably going to have some erratic movements that look nothing athletic whatsoever. So just being conscious of that. As things get more dynamic or competitive, so if we're doing stuff for time, so maybe some groundwork or some pummeling, you're going to want some space. So you'll see in the videos that I have that some of the stuff is on our turf, which is about like 4 meters by 7 meters long. So we usually get about 4 lines going, or sometimes 2 lines going, depending on what the movement is. But we have to be really conscious because we're surrounded by sharp metal objects in a weight room. So a lot of the stuff that I would say that has more oomph behind it or amplitude behind it, I would say for out on the grass or on the turf. But again, you also have to realize that, like when I would work with our rugby league team, guys are wearing cleats, and I still have a hematoma from last summer from demonstrating something. So just be conscious of those things. Again, we're not teaching them to be wrestlers. We're teaching them the principles of wrestling. So in some of the videos, Brock's our rugby manager, and he's a former national team wrestler, and so he's watching, and I could see him losing it in the background, and he came up and he's asking me about this kid's head position and his hands position, and I'm like, Brock, I'm not worrying about this right now, because the goal is to get them in a similar position and let them learn how to finish it on their own. So again, you have to also be cautious if you do bring in a wrestler, that it might be beneficial if you have a wrestler that has a bit of a background in team sport, which many of them do. So you'll realize that most of the wrestlers that I've ever worked with or coached with at an elite level, national team or provincial level, have probably played at least rugby when they were younger. So like they can at least take the context and understand a little more. Wrestling requires a little more internal cueing than is popular. So we're taught now about the importance of external cueing, and I think no one's going to argue that. But because wrestling is so foreign and it is an individual sport, it is very different. And I'm not taking anything away from individual sports, but they tend to be heavily drill focused and heavily work rate based. So a lot of the times the coaching is very simplistic, especially when you look at it as a development model. So in wrestling, and when I was a head wrestling coach, we had grade 8s through grade 12 and boys and girls. So you kind of have to really initiate each conversation with the most simplest cues possible, which ends up being internal. Put your left hand here, your right hand goes here. So very simple. And the reality is, at my stage, I start with that, and then I let them have at her, and then I just slowly add tweaks, and we start to get a little more external as we go. Some of the concepts and considerations that we need to talk about that I think traditional sport could benefit from: offense and defense are taught together. So for example, if I'm going to show a gut wrench in wrestling, which I probably wouldn't show for my other athletes, I'm going to show the defense for it right after. So that's a bit foreign to some sports. So like in football, you're not taught what the defender is doing. You're just focusing on the offense. And I think there would be a lot of value if the offense knew what the defense is doing a little more. And obviously at the higher level, you see that. But this is really, this stuff could be used at any level. But the reality is I'm talking more from our university level down. So this is a really different type of contact. So this isn't a guy running at 20 miles an hour and hitting a quarterback in the back type of contact. This is a guy getting picked up or girl getting picked up and put down, or getting thrown, which is like almost like a whip. So it's a different type of contact than you might see in terms of collision. So don't think of contact as just collisions. There's a lot of, in wrestling, it's a little bit different again, because it's a lot of push-pull and a lot of downward pressure. So the goal is to pull your opponent to the ground and then tilt them or pin them. So quite often in football or rugby, we're kind of coming up on the rise, where wrestling at times it goes the opposite. So you just have to be conscious what drills or what exercise or what you're using is going to complement what you're trying to actually coach. You're going to get your joints taken to end range motion. The way we turn someone to get points in wrestling is you literally are cranking on their joints. So in the picture below here, you can see in the red, there is a lot of downward pressure. So her right hand is actually putting pressure on her opponent's left shoulder, while her arm is actually torquing it back. And she's blocking her head with her knee, with her left knee, so that she can circle around to tilt her opponent. So the way you're getting tilted is because you're getting so much pressure, you have no choice but to move. So we're not trying to do that with our athletes, because we're showing them the concepts, but we have to be conscious that you don't take some huge prop or O-lineman and get his arm cranked over his shoulder because you are elevating risk. Again, I show these things, but I have a bit of a caveat before I go there. If you push or pull hard enough in wrestling, you're going to go for a ride. So your energy is going to get displaced by your opponent quickly. And I would argue the same goes in a lot of other sports. So I put in brackets here, wrestling is the OG of reactive neuromuscular training. This is what they do every day. For every action, there's a reaction to them for the most part. If you're going to use wrestling, invest in it. You can't just copy these videos and think you're going to get the same desired effect. And again, I'm not trying to elevate what I'm doing here. I'm asking that you put the same level of attention if you're going to use this into as if you were learning how to Olympic weightlift, or if you're learning how to sprint, or if you're learning how to change direction or elevation. If you're going to use it, really understand what you're trying to get out of it. Great body position with average technique will best great technique with average body position. So putting yourself in the right place at the right time is often not something we talk about. We try to nuance it with saying that they read and react really well, or they change elevation really well. But the reality is athletes who know how to get to the right place at the right time tend to do better than ones who don't, even if they have great technique, because they can manipulate positions far better than anyone else. And that's kind of the crux of athleticism, in my opinion. They really get the idea around levers and mechanical advantage without understanding biomechanics, because that's all they do all day long. And again, we always talk to our athletes about the why around things, but we don't need to get into biomechanics, but we could just show them why the body moves a certain way when I do this. So I think that's an important concept for coaches to understand, is like, you don't have to break down the biomechanics of a movement with the kids or the athletes, but you do have to explain to them why this is happening. Where the head goes, the body follows. I think everybody's taught that. Principles over systems or rules. This is really free flowing if you're going to take this and use this as a concept. The idea here, as in that picture below, is the principle is she's blocking the head. So she's taking away her ability to, her freedom of movement. She's cranking on the shoulder to create a tilt, and then she's going to add movement to it. So those are the concepts that I would take to move into how I'm coaching. In wrestling, if you stop, you get scored on. You'll see, I remember our coaches saying things like, oh, so-and-so took a loaf, meaning they just didn't do their job, or they just stood around. And the reality is, in sport, in football, if I am an offensive lineman and I'm standing around, there's a good chance I'm going to get cranked in the side of the head, or I'm going to get hurt. And in wrestling, you're going to get scored on, or you're going to get hurt. So you do not stop. And you'll see a lot of videos on YouTube of people getting, kind of stopping before the whistle goes. And it looks like it's a bit of a jerk move on the other person, but that's what they're taught to do, is you go until you hear a whistle or someone pulls you off the person. Ultimately, my goals for this are to create a comfort level around contact, both with your partner and the ground. It is foreign for an athlete to do a shoulder roll or a cartwheel if they haven't done it since they're 3. Getting them comfortable being on all fours on the ground, or referee's position, it used to be called. Getting them comfortable being on their hands and knees and scrambling, it is something that's invaluable in my opinion. I always teach or kind of reiterate to the athletes, my goal is to put them in a position where they're forced to create success out of. So I want to put them in a position that maybe is compressed or uncomfortable, and I want them to learn how to move their base, elevate or sink their hips to put them into a position that they can get score points or create better success out of. I talked about learning to create tension and manipulate in others, and this is honestly one of the best things for wrestling. Learning to be strong on your feet and on the ground. Learning how to create angles. Like, we don't talk about that in sport, and we don't talk about it in strength and conditioning, but wrestling is about creating angles. Your space and equipment constraints are something I think we all are going to deal with unless you have a wrestling room right next to your gym. Wrestling is close quarters. There's no way around that. So ultimately, you need an open space if you're going to do this correctly. It really encourages creativity, and it's a great exposure to variability and uncertainty, which is something they're not used to, especially in a traditional weight room. You know, you're coming in on Monday and you're doing your cleans and your squats and then your deadlift, whatever it happens to be. You know, Wednesday's going to do this. So giving this little uncertainty, variability keeps them engaged, especially in warm-ups. And that's part of the reason why I spend a lot of time during our warm-ups doing these types of things, because I can check a lot of boxes in a 15 to 20 minute warm-up in our off season or wherever I need to do it. And I can reiterate that stress over and over, and I can build on that stress over and over, and it's hidden within the warm-up or in the post work, so that we're not taking away from the, I mean, I don't think it's mundane, but I think athletes probably get pretty tired of doing the same thing over and over and over again. So it's also to get out of the sagittal plane. Again, I'm not knocking on track or those saying you need to sprint and jump, but let's not forget that every sport, other than individual sports for the most part, really require a lot of change of direction, change of elevation, and they need to get comfortable getting out of that. Obviously, in the development stages, we're going to own the sagittal plane before we worry about anything else, but just be conscious of that. And then we're trying to inoculate or temper them for contact, basically, is the ultimate. So just when to implement this is really simple. I do it year round for tumbling. I use it in my extensive work in our movement sessions. So like as an example, for, you know, if my skill guys in football are doing a tempo run, I might do some tempo work with the lineman in a shorter duration just to mitigate some of the pounding. And I might throw in some tumbling and transition work there. Definitely don't do many of the advanced or higher amplitude movements during the season. Again, it is a stress on your wrists and elbows, and it can be dodgy at times. So just being conscious that, you know, even a cartwheel may seem simple for us, but it might not be for your athletes, especially if you're working with like a mixed bag of, say, football athletes where you have 300-pound linemen and 170 to 195-pound skill guys. The stand-up work that you'll see in the videos, I put it year-round in warm-ups on some level, but I really keep it very basic. So my pummeling and just some like push-pull type work. And again, I do a lot of it in my warm-ups pre-game and pre-practice. And again, for some of the conditioning, some extensive work and similar to the above with the tumbling. And again, for rugby, football, sevens, league, the contact, like heavy contact sports that I have, I'll put it around year-round. The groundwork, you can put the concepts in if you have the space year round. But again, I would say the ground stuff is really mostly specific for your rugby league, rugby union type guys. And at times I'll use some of it for maybe other sports, but for the most part, I tend to use this more for our heavy contact sport athletes. So here's a couple things we've done with our wrestling team. So our rugby team. So the way rugby works in BC, it's a little different than across the country based on weather, basically. So from basically late August until mid-November, we have our first half of the season, then they get a break from mid-November to mid-January, and then the second half starts. So they get this big break, and we want to make sure that we're getting our athletes staying fit and staying healthy and lifting and doing some different stress. So we asked our buddy Chris, who runs Westsider Wrestling at a high school that's close to us, and we're able to bring our guys out to have a session led by some of his coaches. And I just kind of helped ask the questions that we want to see done. So some tumbling, some basic stand up, just so they get a different voice. And it was a lot of fun for them as well. And what we've, you're going to see in these videos here really quickly, hopefully they work well, is the guy on the edge here is a provincial champion wrestler, heavyweight wrestler. And you'll see him in the other videos, he can move. But you'll see the variability as you look deeper behind the videos. So I'll just see if this. So these guys are actually doing a back handspring, which I start with just a backwards roll, but we preface, I'm not going to hold someone back if they can do the handspring. We would just teach the roll, and the people who just happen to do it, if they're doing it and it looks good, I'm going to let them do it. So you'll see a little bit of variability in both videos. This one's at full speed, so I think it's a little choppy. I think this happened last time. I'll just pass on this. I think it might be easier to show some of the other videos. But what you can see is there's layers across the wrestling mat where some athletes are obviously getting it and others aren't. Oops. Sorry. Okay, so some of the next slides, I'm not going to spend too much time on because I want the viewers just to be able to click on the links. But I do want to preface, when I say we take time on this, this is some of our graduate assistants actually learning how to do it. I think it's really important that if you're going to teach these, you should feel what it feels like. So you understand how to progress or regress or lateralize movements based on what you're seeing. And just to know that this could be dodgy at times, like understanding the spatial constraints and how fast this actually can get and how competitive it can get. So I want it to be clear that you should probably practice this if you're going to do it. So the next videos or the next area is just some stuff that you can look through as a viewer, and then I'm going to go into some other videos. But I just want to show here's some videos of like learning how to fall and some progressions. They're not in a particular order, but you can kind of go from top to bottom and get an idea of how they flow. How we integrate wrestling into sessions and some of the stand-up examples. I just put this picture in here because my buddy is wearing an old school singlet, and I wanted to make sure that he feels shame for that from 15 years ago. So that was a trip to Cuba where we actually went with a provincial team, and I think he's wrestling one of our, a guy who immigrated to Canada and became an Olympian for Canada. So kind of cool, but there's a couple videos here. And then some of the stand-up examples that are continued, and then some of the groundwork. And again, you can see here on the turf, this is pretty much what I would pre-COVID would see on a regular basis, is 25 to 30 kids. And so we can put our neck work in and some of our rolling work in without having a huge amount of space. So you can layer things in as you see fit. So I'm going to stop the share there, Trevor. And if you have any questions, go ahead. Otherwise, I'm going to go into just some of the videos to talk through them and go from there.
We're rocking along here. It looks good. So folks, again, the slides are available for you. You can click any of those links that were shown to go see individual videos, many of which Joe's about to go through now.
Yeah, so I'll just spend a little bit of time showing a little screenshot or a snapshot of what we're doing. And again, you can look at the space and you'll see that they're obviously differing athletes. So this volleyball athletes, this is one of our first progressions, and it's just a half kneeling to fall basically. And I'm just gonna, Trevor, that looks okay? Okay.
Yes, that's fine.
Okay. So basically what we're doing is we're just asking the athlete to sit out. So you're going to see the athletes get pretty creative here. And obviously we're drawn to the first video, which is the guy in the gray here, but watch what's going on in the back. So again, we talk about different size, different body types. So just be conscious that there's no perfect way to do anything here. There's just some are more efficient as long as they're not at risk of injury. So what we're asking the athlete to do is learn how to sit on their hip and disperse with their free hand the energy that's occurred from the actual roll. And so this progression here differs from the first one because we're asking them to come back to the start position. So they're going to create a little bit more momentum to get to there. The next video that you'll see that'll be coming up is going to transition them from this position into something that's a little bit more dynamic. So we're just basically adding another layer on each session. The idea behind this would be the same as teaching any type of progression. As they show some level of competency, we want to add to it. Again, as you watch the bigger guys, they're going to struggle a little bit more, but at the end of the day, it doesn't have to look perfect. They're getting the concept of transferring their force into a different direction and using that roll to create a better position.
Do you ever vary which leg forward based off which way you're rolling, mix it up, and you say try and do it without your arms, try and do it with your arms?
Absolutely. In general, the easiest progression is, so the guy in the blue here would be just to sit out on his left leg. So to rotate his hip and sit on his left butt cheek and just let momentum take him over to that shoulder. But you'll see some of them go the opposite way. It's not necessarily wrong. There's not a right way to do it. And I don't want to sound aloof here, but the reality is it's more about the contact in the ground that I'm concerned about, and then the transition out of that contact. And you'll see they're using their arms, and you can see that loop there, which is not quite as efficient, but there's nothing wrong with that. Okay, so I think this will just go right on to the next one. So these are, again, this is just to show that in our setting, we're able to do this. So like I said, you can see each one of these squares on the turf is 1 meter by 2 meters. So we just put our group into 2 lines and we go, and we're just doing our basic tumbling progressions and a simple forward roll. And some guys will turn it into a shoulder roll based on what they're able to do. But again, I just want to preface that this did not look this pretty, and I'm not saying this is pretty by any means the first time we did it, but literally the second and the third time it gets so much more efficient. In general, with my tumbling, I start with 1 roll, just see how they land. Then I try to get them to roll and in a position they can create success in. Then I'll do multiple rolls once they're comfortable and they can create some momentum, which you're seeing here. And these are our football athletes.
So again, this would be kind of at the end of the warm up before they head in the weight room.
Yeah, it's layered in at some point in the warm up, and then just some different transitions from some crawling patterns into a forward roll. And like you'll see some guys turn it into a bit of a shoulder roll. Again, this is really foreign to them, right? So same idea, it's just a backwards progression. But like understanding and learning how to tuck your chin, you would like to assume that every athlete by the time they get to the level, this level would have that, and it's not there for the most part, but as soon as we reiterate it once and they see how much more efficient they are, it just becomes second nature. And again, these are, you can see guy in the black here is just turning it into a back handspring. It's not perfect, but he was comfortable doing it. I'm not going to stop him to do it. And then this is a great teaching tool because backpedaling is obviously a huge part of our programming, just like it should be everybody's in some level. And what I want to preface is this wasn't planned when he fell, but you could see he transitioned well into that fall. So the next video is just a forward roll into a back pedal. And you can see the guy with the hat eats it, but he gets himself out of it in a good position. And you're also going to see here some multi-rolls into a forward sprint. And again, you're going to see differing abilities here as we go. So the guy on the left was his first session. And I want to preface that he has worked so hard in the last year. This summer, he was at 4 sessions a week on the field. I've been with him on court with his group, and like he's a different person now, his body, everything. And but his effort was there. It's just so foreign for a basketball player to take a fall like that. So again, I don't have the video showing how it's improved, but he has improved immensely, obviously. So the next one is just some change of elevation. Again, we're using our space that we have available. Wrestlers are probably gritting their teeth right now, but the idea is I want them using their partner's hand to help them change their elevation. So it's not just trying to run underneath someone's arm. They're actually using that tactile feedback to elevate, to help drop their hips. This is just another variation from a compressed position. I don't use a lot of cones. I'd rather use body types. And here's just another variation of the duck under from a little bit closer. One thing to realize too is that if you're working with a wrestler, or sorry, with a football player, they're somehow going to turn what you're trying to teach them into their specific movement. So like if they're a defensive lineman, they're going to try to turn your duck under into a rip, or if they're trying to do evading, they're going to turn it into a swim move. And what I'm trying to reiterate is there are similarities to what we're showing you, but they're not football specific to those moves. So the idea that specific is the way your hips move, the way you make contact, how you use your upper body to manipulate tension, how you drop your hips is very specific, but the actual movement itself doesn't need to replicate what your football coach is actually teaching you. So you can see him trying to turn it into a bit of a rip here. And we just make things a little bit more dynamic. Again, these are seconds out of our workout, right? Like this is, once they're drilled in them, they know what they're doing, it goes really quickly. We do a lot of pummeling just because it's fairly safe. It's a great upper body warm-up. Pre-practice, pre-game, this is heavy in our rugby warm-up. It's hard to do in football, obviously, because they have pads on, but quite often what I'll do if we travel when we traveled would be some kind of activation type work a couple hours before the game. So if we don't have access to the gym to do a light lift, we might come in and do, you know, a few like a basically an extended dynamic warm up with a few plyos, some short sprints, and a little bit of contact just to get them prepped for the game that afternoon or evening. So these are just basic pummeling drills. They're just fighting for inside position. Again, wrestlers would not agree at the position, but I'm still getting a lot of the boxes checked that I'm trying to get off here. And again, all of these movements need to be very short. I should have prefaced that as well. When I say I use this for conditioning, I'm talking extensive conditioning where it's a short bout followed by maybe a jog, or a short sprint followed by a walk or a jog. You're never going to get into these positions for more than a couple seconds. On the high end, I might go 8 to 10 seconds where I need them to actually feel what I want them to feel, or I think it takes a little bit of time to develop what I want to get. This is, again, an over-under position, which is very common in wrestling, and this is just a bit of a push and a pull. So one partner's kind of pushing in, the other guy's trying to pull him. And what I'm looking for is a guy who's getting pulled to move his feet into a good position where he could create success out of. So both guys are working, but they're both getting two different things. So you can see the guy in the yellow does a good job of keeping his base when he moves, where if you do this with a kid who hasn't done much of this before, or an athlete who hasn't done this much before, they're going to buckle, or their heels are going to click. They're going to cross over every time they move. So you just have to be conscious that of the population you're working with. Both of these guys are high-level athletes. The guy in the black is actually played in the CFL last year and is signed with the 49ers this year. So he's a good athlete, strong athlete. Both of them clean over 330 pounds. We're very strong guys. So I have a little more bandwidth with them than I might with, say, my first years, who I'm still teaching how to squat. So I might just keep them more linear, where I can let these guys push, pull, drag into a few different directions. This is more dynamic again, just so we're getting some yielding here. Again, we're doing the over-under, we're combining the pummeling and a little bit of the yielding work. And again, we're in our constrained space and we're able to make it work. Wrestlers, don't judge me on their pummeling ability there, please. Here's some of our collar tie-ups, which is another very specific position. This is our rugby league guys a couple summers ago, just doing, again, so this is some yielding, this is some contact prep, this is just some hinge work for the base level, and then some change of elevation work. So they're pushing, they're pulling, they're raising, they're sinking. So they're learning how to move their hips into a better position. I then give them a little bit of variability to play with it to potentially attack a leg. If they see something, I want them to take it, which I think is in the next video. Here's a wrestler I was talking about. You can see he's quite fluid, where the other guy is clearly not, but he's giving what he's got. So again, this is a great piece to our warm-up to prep them for some of the contact stuff that they're doing. And then here, I think, is where I was talking about giving them an opportunity. If they see an opportunity to take a leg, they're going to take it. So again, probably a wrestling background, you can see, but he's manipulating his partner to get into a position where he can create success and potentially score points. This is some of our groundwork. Again, this is where I would say you need the most amount of space, because you can see it's quite dynamic and they don't really know what they're doing. Basically what the guy on the top is doing is just trying to keep the guy on the bottom on the ground. So they're putting downward pressure. This is more of we just old school position 1, 2, and 3. So the guy in the blue is starting on his stomach. The guy on top, his job is to try to keep him on the ground the whole time. So what I'm trying to get this guy to do is learn how to scramble. He's fighting the downward pressure the guy on top of is doing, and he's trying to elevate and come up on a rise. So he starts from the bottom, gets onto his knees, and ends on his feet, and we don't finish to a takedown. Same idea, just a little bit slower. And then we start from a less compressed position, same idea. Guy on the top should be giving downward pressure. His right hand should have been on his head. And then the guy's picking him up and trying to finish to a takedown. So again, this is after they're warmed up. Oh, sorry. I think that's the last one anyway. So again, those are rough. nothing looks perfect because it's not. The goal is more to expose into concepts. Oh, sorry, sure. I guess I can close YouTube. There we go.
So you talked about using it as a conditioning tool. Most of the videos you showed, it looked like it was more of a warm up, learn to move tool. Do you ever implement it into conditioning?
Yep. So like for like I said in the earlier on, like for some of the extensive work, we'll do some crawling to a rump. So like while my guys, my skill and my semi guys are doing like a traditional tempo run early on, our linemen might be doing, or say our injured guys who aren't ready for the pounding, what they might do is say a bear crawl to a roll to a 5-yard sprint, jog to the 20, walk back, and we'll just keep it constantly moving. We've used it in like some of the yielding stuff again, in some of the conditioning, like the push and pull for short bursts. So, you know, like 8 to 10 second go every minute on the minute, depending on what we're working, where they're really fighting at each other. I wouldn't do the ground stuff as conditioning. It ends up being some level of conditioning because it's so foreign to them. They're just fried by the end of it. But that I think is more just their nervous system isn't used to being put in weird positions for the most part. Again, for me, I would argue that the easiest way to implement pieces of this would be in your warm-ups. And when you have an entire field, the weather's good, you have space to experiment, your early days where we're just trying to get our athletes back into it and we want them highly engaged, because they end up having quite a bit of fun with this. I also play a lot of games with these. So are you familiar with combatives? It's an Indian game. It's unreal. It's basically you have defenders and raiders, and you have like I make a modified version, but Daniel O'Galley, who is our Olympic gold medalist, he used to play, he got contracted and made some good money doing it as well. And I've worked with a guy who played in India professionally. Basically what you have is you have the defenders are guys in like almost like a hockey crease right in front of the net. And the idea is the raiders will come in and they've got to try and tag one or two of the guys and then run back to the start line and do that as many times as they can in a given time. And that's how they score points. Well, the defender's job is to try to immobilize the raiders. So as soon as they try and touch them, they can break their chain and try to tackle them, and they try to hold them until the time runs out. So I use games like that as well, or manipulations of that sometimes for some conditioning as well, but also just to break the monotony. Like, sprinting is not fun. Jumping is not fun. Doing squats every week and deadlifting every week is not fun. And we have to remember that being an athlete at the university and higher, there's a lot of monotony. They're training 15 to 25 hours a week. Between their lifting and their practice sessions, it could be anywhere from 8 to 12 sessions a week, plus studying, plus therapy. They've got to have some highlight in their day. And I think getting them to compete in the off season with these types of drills is really beneficial as well. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here, and you can take it where you see fit, right? That's the whole point of using this, is there's a lot of opportunities here to play with it.
So do you have any measures of before, after doing this and what the outcomes were, or is it largely anecdote in what you've seen?
It's pretty anecdotal. I mean, we haven't had anyone get injured from this. I haven't had, and I've been doing this for probably 15 years. I've done these drills even with my Olympic wrestlers that I've worked with, and I think it was quite foreign to them when I took out of context, say, don't think like a wrestler for this movement. I want you to try to do this, this, and this. And it was completely foreign for them as well. So I think it's really hard to quantify athleticism, I guess would be my answer to that. And that's part of the problem where, in my opinion, where strength and conditioning has gone, is we're trying to get metrics and data on everything. And to me, what matters is that you are a better athlete than you are a better weightlifter. And I'm not saying we shouldn't put merit into quantifying sprinting, jumping, lifting. I'm just saying that I don't know how you can quantify that, and if quantify athleticism. And if the reason we're not quantifying athleticism is because we can't measure it, that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it.
Yeah, and we always talk about physical literacy and the need to learn how to squat, lunge, plank, those sorts of things. But in reality, rolling around and tumbling is probably a heck of a lot more physically literate than some of those things we often do in the weight room. as useful as those are.
It-
Uh,
totally.
Tell me about the contact side of it. Have you ever had any pushback, women's sport, ADs coming down on you, parents fussing?
My only caveat would be obviously from a demonstration perspective with the women. Quite often, if they have a male coach, I might demonstrate with them. Like, I'm a big dude, and like it's already hard. I have 350 unreal female athletes at our university, and it's intimidating when you have a 6'6", 330-pound dude trying to tell you why you need to squat or why you need to do this or why you need to do the wrestle or whatever it is. But they want to get better and they see the value in it. But I'm also conscious that I'm not going to, sometimes you have to put your hands in your head in different positions. So quite often I might just get two of them together and say, put your hand here, and I'll go back to that kind of internal cueing just to get them in the position, and then I'll walk them through it. So there's a little difference between there, but I also have 6 female graduate assistants, and one of my associates is a full-time female. So I have 7 females plus about 8 to 10 undergrad females as well that I can utilize to help demonstrate, where with the guys, I might get in there a little bit more.
Yeah, and it's interesting because at some universities, there's absolutely no contact allowed between athlete and coach. Like even spotting, sometimes is a
Yeah,
sketchy.
and it's rightfully so, but quite often I preface with, are you okay with me demonstrating with you? Or I'll always grab the guys that I know who've maybe wrestled, or the guys that I know are comfortable with that contact. I use feedback a lot. I'm not obviously going to put my hand in an inappropriate position, but I always ask, hey, can I put my hand on your knee? Can I put my hand on your shoulder? Like I do ask for permission before, and I think that needs to be understood, that you don't just go in there and start grabbing people. And I know there was just a case a couple weeks ago of some inappropriate behavior from a coach in the States. And I don't know the full story on it, but we have to be professionals here. And this is something that athletes are not going to be comfortable with. So I always operate on a continuum of easiest to hardest, and we're going to start somewhere in the middle, and we're just going to float left and right and see where people are at. And if the comfort level is really low for some people, then I'm okay with them doing the lowest level until they get comfortable with it. The reality is their sport requires them to have huge collisions and huge contacts, and if this is part of what's going to help them get better at that, then they have to make a decision if they want to do that or not.
So one more thing on programming. So it sounds like you have your progression, you work through a progression on any given day. Some people may be at different levels of progression. You have a general theme in each workout as to what you're going to do, but it doesn't sound like you have sets, reps. You just have 10 minutes or 15 minutes of work and see what you can fit in and make them better. Is that your approach?
Yeah, you know what it is, Trevor? It's like if you're working with like an elite weightlifter and things are going awesome, you'll probably go just before you think it's too much and you're going to stop. But if things are going terrible, you're going to cut it off right away. Right. And I would say the same thing. It's just tougher to gauge in a team setting. So if I'm seeing the masses are not getting it, I have zero problem blowing the whistle, stop. We're moving on. And I think that has to be really understood. And that's a really good point, is that it's going to get really weird for some of these athletes. So if it looks dumpster fire-ish right off the bat, abandon it. There's nothing wrong with that. And if it looks good, then you know that you've probably started at the appropriate level, and then you can build from there.
So for all the strength coaches watching this who can't do a somersault themselves or a back roll or a cartwheel, where do they start, do you think?
I think they start with basic progressions. If like I'm crippled from my playing career, I've got no discs in my lower back, my ankles locked, I've got pins everywhere, and I'm always in pain, but I can squat down and I can just fall back and tuck my chin and disperse running, and that's a starting point. I'm going a little heavier because I'm working with young athletes who should, like falling from your knee isn't an issue. But the same thing, there's nothing wrong with doing like a bit like getting down low to the ground and try it. And if that's uncomfortable, try a log roll. Like find different positions where you're going to get comfortable with it. And to be honest with you, if we had to do everything our athletes do as we get aged, some of us won't last very long in this career. And honestly, I try to demonstrate as much as I can, as often as I can, but the reality is, I have things that aren't going to get fixed in my lifetime that are, I have to deal with, and I know what my limitations are. So I'm not going to try to be an 18-year-old kid, and I'm definitely not going to try to throw a kid around to exert my will on him because I know how to put him in a bad position, right? So we just have to be conscious in doing what we're comfortable doing. But if you're not comfortable doing it, then you need to learn it inside and out. The best thing I tell my graduate assistants, the best thing that happened to me before my back surgery was I was very immobile. I learned how to coach when I came out of having my L2, 3, 4, 5, S1 removed because I couldn't demonstrate for probably, there's a good year there where I was really immobilized, and I worked and I went through it and I did everything, but I really learned how to talk my way through things and use tactile feedback and other things to get athletes in the position I want. And that, to be honest with you, I think that played a huge role in my ability to coach. So I would say the same kind of thing.
Yeah, wait till you're 50. You don't have a choice, even if you aren't hurt.
Every
Really good
decade
at hand
gets worse,
signals. I want you to do this kind of thing, you know.
Your first 40 years are freebies. I think once you hit 40, it's like every decade is exponentially worse.
Have to be on the planet right now. That's about as good as it gets. All right, that's our time, my friends. So thank you very much. Thank you to everybody who's spent time on this webinar. Again, take a look at the slides and the links there, and reach out to Joe if you're looking for more. Joe, hope to have you back and even get more detail when we have a conference and all this COVID stuff settled down. We'll get together and we'll have a good time.
Cheers.
All right, man. Take care of yourself.
Thanks. Bye.
Good job, buddy.